The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, as we look to close out 2024 and look ahead to 2025, it's definitely been an interesting year on the weather front, and we still have some things to keep an eye on as we close out one year and look ahead to the new one. Joining us now for our weekly weather conversation, Eric Snodgrass with Conduit is joining us here. And Eric, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you and yours. Thanks for joining us. And man, oh man, what a year ahead it has been in terms of the weather, hasn't it been?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this before we started today about what 2024 was, right? So remember, 2024 started off brutally cold for about a week in January, and then it got very mild for the rest of the winter. Spring started. What did we have? Almost 25,000 reports of severe weather. We then had 1,700 tornadoes. We saw it get very hot in the west. 8.5 million acres in the west burned this year. We saw flooding in the northern plains, upper Midwest, western Corn Belt. Then that whole area, the whole Mississippi Basin, went hot and dry in September and October. The end of November, Thanksgiving comes along. The whole pattern flips. We've been in that pattern now for a while, and we're trying to question how things are going to change in 2025. So if you ever think my job gets boring, it does not. There's always something new to talk about. And 2024 will be one that I don't want to say it this way, but might leave a little bit of stain in my head on exactly what the atmosphere is capable of doing.
Absolutely. Well, I will say this, judging by the forecast here for the end of the year through Christmas and New Year's, it looks like you might have a quieter time frame anyway. Things looking relatively mild on into the new year for many folks, Eric.
Yeah, it is. So the jet extension that we've been watching since Thanksgiving is going to continue to be a major factor because it's moved north and it has gotten a bit stronger. The whole idea behind this is that this is going to begin to drive very mild air across the eastern half of North America. And that's the way we're going to finish out this year, very mild air. But that's not going to last long. It is going to flip around once we get into the beginning of 2025, and some much, much colder air is going to be driven out of the Canadian prairie back. So if you want my forecast for you, my forecast going forward is expect volatility in temperatures. But you're right, Christmas time, no, there's not going to be a major winter storm causing problems for somebody. The biggest one's going to be off the West Coast. So in terms of safety, in terms of those very positive things that we like around Christmas, which is no major holiday weather catastrophes, I'm okay with that. But just get ready, because it's going to be a different January.
Well, and we think ahead to January and into the early part of 2025, a couple things for us to kind of take a look at and dissect here. And something that you and I have been talking about now for the last several weeks is just the possibility that is out there in terms of drought going into 2025. And you were looking at some things, particularly the ongoing drought issues in Mexico and in some of the southern areas of the U.S. Talk about this and how all of this could play a role here, Eric.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Jesse, talking about drought in winter is against everything I kind of understand about the atmosphere. So this is not wise for me to do. But I guess the reason why I'm saying this is because, all right, we have a La Nina that's peaking right now. Okay, it'll probably peak for the next 3 weeks. Looked at all the historical data. 6 and 10 years after a peak in a La Nina, we tend to have a dry plains Midwest, drier. Okay, we also tend to be hotter. Secondly, we had a very dry fall, September and October. And to be honest with you, the plains are still very, very dry, as you just mentioned, as is Mexico. So we look at the years that follow that, we tend to have drought that builds in those same areas. So there's just a couple of boxes that are getting checked, but the Mexican drought is concerning to me. There's no subtropical jet. We've seen the Sun Belt, that would be parts of the Southwest, so from Western Texas to Southern California, stay very, very dry. And the whole of the plains for the last month, single digits in terms of percent of normal precipitation. And I don't have anything major coming through to finish this year. So I just don't like it. And in other words, if we're going to not talk about drought in 2025. It means it's going to have to go just wild at the end of winter into spring into those areas with huge blizzards or major severe spring thunderstorms. But if we don't get that, you know what happens? The dry line, which typically sits somewhere in the panhandle of Oklahoma, Texas, and parts of eastern Colorado, it just shifts. It shifts east. It gets over into parts of central Kansas and central Oklahoma over toward eastern Texas. And if we see that shift, and we'll watch drought build, and this is what we always concern ourselves with. If there's drought already established and building in spring, it just tends to have the ability to shove itself farther and farther to the east with time. So until I have evidence to overturn that thought process, which is why we talk every Monday, okay? But until I have evidence to overturn it, I'm just going to keep thinking about it and making sure people know that there is concern going into 2025.
Well, and to your earlier point, talking about drought in winter there's a lot between now and planting season. And as evidenced in 2024, of course, we saw it. I don't think a lot of us foresaw all of the immense flooding in the northern plains of the Western Corn Belt, for instance. So, I mean, we could see between now and then something that comes along and eliminates a wide range of drought issues.
Yeah, I mean, for transparency, I went back and looked at my presentations I was giving in winter for the spring of 23 and then the spring of 24. I did not mention up until it was late February that the risk of very dry spring weather started to show up in 2023. Okay. And then in 2024, I didn't pick up on the really wet pattern that we saw that flooded out parts of Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, eastern Nebraska. I didn't pick up on that until about a month before. I'm like, hey, we're looking wetter and wetter and wetter. And it wasn't even like, I'm like, oh, we're looking so wet that you're not going to plant. It was like, hey, it just looks wetter.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that so that, to be honest with you, it's so that no one hears what I say thinking that I have a tremendous amount of confidence in it and that they want to go out and make a big bet on it. Don't do that, please. I'm just saying a couple of boxes have been checked. We need to keep an eye on it. I think there's some drought risk in 2025 that we can't ignore at this point.
All right, let's shift our attention to South America as we get ready to close out the year there and look ahead to harvest for soybeans in Brazil, the second crop corn, safrita corn planting, etc. How are things lining up across Brazil, Argentina? As we've been talking for quite a while, weather conditions have been fairly ideal, Eric.
They have. In fact, I looked this morning at the NDVI values. They were just updated. It's still outside, above the 20-year envelope. So it's like the best looking NDVI. So, I mean, from space, the crop looks really healthy that we've got for Brazil. So the forecast is drier in Argentina. It's drier in southern Brazil, but it's also cooler by 3 to 5 degrees. So who cares? Let it be a little drier for a little while. They've had recent rain. Storms just rolled through a couple of those areas this weekend. If I had one area to maybe watch, it's the center west, so Mato Grosso to Goiás over toward Minas Gerais. These areas are very wet, but that's also where the sandiest soil is. So it doesn't matter. They can get that kind of rain. What I want to know, Jesse, is if it stays this wet all the way until the end of January, maybe they're not able to get the crop out very efficiently. And I think that is a concern.
Well, and you think about that, we translate it to what we see here in the U.S. I mean, if it, rains buckets substantially, it's pretty tough to get into the field and get a crop harvested. And you look at Brazil, I mean, we can get work done when it's wet, but when it's super wet, it's not very beneficial for getting out and getting the harvest done, is it?
It's not, but the difference is, I think, in Brazil is that most of their precipitation is diurnally driven, which means that the mornings are always dry, then it just pours for a little bit in the afternoon, and then it dries back out. And their soil types they're vastly different from what we have for most of the central U.S. And so we know that they can drain 4 to 6 inches of rain a week. And that'll be the question, is there more than that coming that could possibly start to give them some issues or keep the crop green too long? I don't know. That is for all of the plant scientists, soil scientists, agronomists out there to help chime in on, and also those that just have a tremendous amount of experience studying that Brazilian crop. But that's something to watch.
Absolutely. All right, Eric, anything final you are watching around the world as we close out 2024?
Yeah, I think when we start talking in 2025 again, there's going to be a bit of a different conversation watching the back end of a La Nina develop and watching the colder air return. So my choice may be different going into the beginning of 2025. And I'll just say this, the finish of 2024 is going to put a lot of mild air over two major metropolitan regions, the eastern half of North America and then much of Europe. So that's not going to put a lot of demand on the natural gas market. But when we flip this all around, those two major epicenters could be timed up at the same time with cold, which could mean the natural gas markets may have an interesting bit of turbulence, if you will, going into 2025. So something to watch.
Folks can stay up to date as well. agweather.com, ag-wx.com for more. Eric's doing a lot of great work with Conduit. agweather.com. Eric Snodgrass with Conduit. Thanks again, my friend. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to you and yours. We'll talk to you in 2025.
Okay. See you, Jesse.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. There, you can watch our latest interviews with the top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. Just go to youtube.com/markettalkag and hit the subscribe button, or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.